Vytas Buciunas, welcome to Radio Wolf. I'm very glad to be able to speak to you.
Thank you, Thomas.
Vytas, we met a couple of years ago at a conference in Kyiv, and I had no idea that a couple of years later we would talk about a war that is happening in the Ukraine. Would you like to say a little bit about your background and your relationship to the Ukraine, and just that people know where you come from?
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course. I'd like to start from one quick observation, because I'm afraid I can forget it. When we met in 2019 in Kyiv, the war was actually already going for 5 years. Mm-hmm. And people in many places tend to forget that, but the war that was a local war, but still a war. Now we have a different kind of, a different scale and different phase of war. Yes, so about myself, professionally, I'm an integral master coach and leadership development facilitator, at least for the last 5 years. Previously, I worked in the financial sector for 20 years. And originally, I'm Lithuanian from Vilnius, but for the last 7 years, we've been living in Kyiv, Ukraine, together with my family. My wife is Ukrainian, so she's Kyiv native, and I'm directly connected to Ukraine for the last 11 years, so quite deep into the processes there that are happening there. Yeah, and together with my wife, we have 6 children for both of us, and 3 of them are Ukrainians. Like actually 2 of them are Ukrainians, but one is half Ukrainian, half Lithuanian. So our whole family is very much connected.
So as we are talking right now today, the offensive in east of Ukraine is starting. So the second phase of the war, at least of this part of the war. From your perspective, where are we after, as you're saying, this is not just a war that started right now, it's a war that has built up. It has at least started with the invasion of the Crimea. In the Donbas region, there's a local war since some time. There's the background of the whole dispute about NATO and Russian interests. And now we have this explosion. From your perspective also, as someone who lived in Kyiv for so many times, who has a Ukrainian family, but who also has an integral thinking about this, what are we experiencing here? What is this war about?
So you asked the question for a couple of hours at least, if we speak on a superficial level. There are so many layers to this situation, and we can approach it from very, very different perspectives. Speaking about how it is going, of course, since 24th of February, when the war started, when this large phase of the war started, there were very many surprises and things that no one expected that they will evolve this way. And of course, the biggest surprise so far is the way the Ukrainians are fighting. Actually, pretty much everyone, even the experts, the military experts and the intelligence experts and in the West are absolutely shocked in a positive way of the decisiveness and the quality of military action by the Ukrainian army. And this makes us hopeful, if not optimistic. Of course, in the beginning, many decision makers and opinion leaders expected that Ukraine will fall in a few days. And there was an actual occurrence in Germany on the 24th of February, when the war started. In the afternoon of that very day, Ukrainian ambassador to Germany came to one of the ministers. In the federal government, I don't remember exactly who it was. Maybe it was a minister of finance or someone else. I don't remember, but the fact was that the ambassador got message that, sorry, we are not going to do much because your country will fail in like X amount of hours. Like, I don't remember which exactly. And that's the fact. That's the public fact. And
that's not broadcasted here, as far as I know.
Yeah. It's and I know that the Ukrainian ambassador is not the most popular person in Germany because he's a troublemaker and he's a rookie. In a sense, he's not following the standard traditional, conservative rules of diplomatic speech. He's actually bringing it straightforward. Mm-hmm. So and the Ukrainians are doing much better than anyone could expect. So the fact that the Russian army moved its forces from Kyiv and Chernihiv region, from the north part of Ukraine, is a sign of a quite clear strategic failure. So the strategic failure is already on the Russian side. Whatever they do, and however the war will end, Russia has already failed big time, and that's already the fact. They promised and threatened to take over the control of the bigger part of Ukraine and to take over Kyiv in 3 days, basically, and they completely failed. They made lots of mistakes, lots of huge mistakes. And if you think about that, one cannot be surprised that the Western countries were underestimating the situation or underestimating the factors that will be at play. But even the Russians, who put lots of money, literally billions of dollars into the intelligence, into secret service operations, into preparing the soil, into infiltrating hundreds of agents into Ukrainian society, into preparing those diversion groups and so on and so forth. Even they completely miscalculated. And that's a very interesting fact. I think many books will be written about that, because they expected that Ukraine will greet the Russians with, maybe not with flowers, but at least with some positive attitude. And what they got in response was a complete and absolutely unanimous resistance, even and especially by the Russian-speaking part of the Ukrainian society. And what Putin did, and I think we are joking that still some monuments should be put after this war and after Putin dies, hopefully sooner than later, some monuments should be put to him, because no one has managed to unite the Ukrainian society this successfully. Because what he did, what the Russian did, the most of the destruction and the most of the atrocities fell on the Russian-speaking cities. And I think that the Ukrainian society got vaccinated for many generations, not for many years, but for many generations, because my children, for example, they already have a direct experience and direct trauma of the Russian world, so to say. I believe that their children and even probably their grandchildren will hear those talks and legends. So this, what has happened over the last couple of months, I think this will have very, very, very long repercussions in the collective memory and in collective conscious, and probably in the collective unconscious. So yeah, so I probably lost the thread. And
no, I think you're on a very, very important thread here, because there's something that as you said, everyone, I mean, surprised is not a word for this. It was just beyond any expectations. Nobody kind of, at least nobody I knew, kind of thought that this would be possible. And it's still something, this heroic thrive in the Ukrainian population, that are books will be written about that, why this is and what this is. And also the Russian atrocities, at least as far as I know, were not anticipated in this way. I mean, one knew what Putin did in Syria, but there was an expectation that he would not do this to a brother country in Europe in the same brutal way. So there is a spiral of heroism on one hand, and on atrocities on the other hand. I did not think about the fact that you just mentioned, that these atrocities mainly happens in the parts of the country that has a Russian majority, so that it brings the Ukrainian society that is a society that is mixed Ukrainian Russian. It's a complicated history, and the eastern parts of Ukraine are to big part Russian in their identity, and the whole historic identity of Ukrainians and Russians is a complicated thing in itself. But it brings something like a national unity. There's also something about Zelensky as a president, who is a very surprising hero. To put it also in developmental sense, because there's this Putin icon, is Putin or horse riding in the tiger, in the Russian tiger, this kind of archaic male thing. And then there's Zelensky being this comedian, in that sense, having a very postmodern side to himself, and not losing this kind of thing, but bringing in this a form of heroic behavior that is unseen, that is unheard of. It's still stunning every time you see that. What is this about, and what does this say about the Ukrainian society as you know it?
Oh yeah, so let me start from making a couple of corrections. First of all, the brotherly nation narrative. It's a complete bullshit. Excuse my French. The Ukrainian and Russian nations have never been the same nation, as Putin likes to say, or brotherly nations. They were always connected. They were always next to each other, but the dynamics has been difficult for several hundreds of years. So there was always some tension, and these are two different nations, and that's very important to realize. I think that's part of the misunderstanding and even miscalculation, both on the Putin side and on the Western side. So these are two separate, different nations, and this brotherly nation narrative is a product of Russian propaganda purely, and they don't see the contradiction, because what you do with your brotherly nation, you just kill and I don't know, and rape and literally start a genocide. That's not the way you really deal with brotherly nations. So they use this narrative only when it is useful. So just as a warning, Ukrainians usually get insulted when they are called brotherly nation with respect to the Russians. Then you said, another important part is the Russians. Those Russian-speaking Ukrainians who are usually mainly living on the left bank of Dnieper River, they they are not Russians. They are Russian-speaking Ukrainians, and that's a huge difference. That makes whole difference, because they identify themselves with Ukraine as a country, as a system of values, which is completely different from Russia. And we see very many examples of those Russian-speaking Ukrainians fighting for Ukraine. They've been fighting in the Donbas region when we were protecting the border, the temporary border, for the last 8 years. And the majority of them were exactly those Russian-speaking Ukrainians. So the language has never been a problem. And that's another narrative which Putin exploits, and his propaganda exploits, that there were some I lost the word, discrimination of those Russian speakers. Never has it been. My wife is a Russian-speaking Ukrainian. She grew up in a family who was speaking Russian at home, and she of course is a Ukrainian, very patriotic, and that's the way it was. Part of the people were just speaking Russian at home, thinking in Russian, but they were identifying themselves with the Ukrainian idea. And Ukraine, as pretty much, in some sense, similar to the US, which is more an idea than a country or a system of ideas, you know. And the main, I would like to now elaborate a little bit about the differences. What are the cultural and even in terms of mentality, what are the differences between these two nations? So the main difference, of course, is the approach to freedom and self-organization. So that makes a whole difference. Traditionally, in Russia, the society was always organized in vertical hierarchies and in very patriarchal and paternalistic kind of systems. There was always a Tsar with absolute power, with its heavy and difficult bureaucratic machine. That's where the corruption is coming from. And the ordinary people, so to say, they were always under some pressure. So the people who were more kind of freedom oriented, or those rebellious souls, they were always either having some problems, being repressed, or I don't know, being imprisoned or something, or they would emigrate historically. And part of those people were actually emigrating to Ukraine, because a significant part of the Ukrainian society is made of those people who were coming from Russia, from the main Russia, in different historic periods. And in Ukraine, there are very deep traditions of self-organization, starting from the Cossack organizational structures. They were always making those so-called circles in small villages, and they would always make collective decisions. And Ukrainians, they don't hold their bosses for long. Even if you see the history, those hetmans, I don't know exactly the English word. These are the local kind of the local dukes, so to say. I'll check very quickly. There are very few of them would hold for more than 2-3 years, because Ukrainians are always very critical about their bosses, including now the presidents. And whenever someone on the top wants to repress the society, and we saw good examples recently, starting from the Maidan in 2014, and another Maidan was in 2004, the society gathers very quickly and gets rid of the repressor, of the dictator. What that we see with Yanukovych, and the Ukrainians would never, like literally never, accept the structure of the society and the structure of dictatorship as in Russia. That's why they're fighting so hard. That's why they're fighting with such a motivation. That's what this courage and desperacy and the same the optimism is coming for, because they know that they're fighting for the core value, which is freedom. So Ukrainian society, by its essence, is a society of free people. Of course, that has another kind of a different side. With freedom, there should come enough responsibility. And in many ways, the Ukrainian society is not that mature in terms of living in those, Western structures, but the process is going very, very fast. And if we compare Ukraine today and Ukraine 10 years ago, these are two different societies in terms of maturity, in terms of carrying its own burden and responsibility. So these are two significant differences. One society is accepting that vertical patriarchal kind of management structure. And not only that, but there are many Russians on a cultural level, they are denying the value of freedom. They openly say that, okay, that's where all those problems come from, your freedom, like all these revolutions, we don't want revolution. So they find a lot of good explanations and justifications for why they don't want freedom. And the Ukrainians say, no, we will never live under any dictatorship. And these are completely different societies.
Interesting. I mean, yes, okay, please continue.
Yeah, sorry. And you also mentioned the phenomenon of Zelensky, and that's I think is a very interesting phenomenon that is happening, and people are fascinated. From my point of view, what we see in his embodiment, and of course, Zelensky is not just one person. Zelensky is an institution, and he's part of the system. But what he's showing up is the very connected and authentic and courageous and decisive leadership with vulnerability. That's very important. He's very, very tough, very decisive, but at the same time, he is not afraid to be vulnerable. And that's something we are not used to recently, at least over the last 20, 30 years. I don't remember any such impressive leaders, at least in the European political domain, of the last 30 years. If we connect to this Fukuyama's idea of the early 90s that the history is over, and there is no more demand for these very impressive, tough, decisive historical figures as Winston Churchill, as I don't know, maybe even I don't know, Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, not to stick to their political views, but at least the way they were showing up and the scale of their kind of political ambitions and so on. So we are not used to this kind of leadership. And I think what is happening that Zelensky is reminding people that, look, this is still possible. This is still allowed. This still exists in the nature. So my personal feeling, and I think the same goes for many people in Western hemisphere, that people are looking at it. Wow, is it still allowed? Can we expect something similar from our leaders? So I think that this is changing the whole kind of political spectrum, and it is bringing a new flavor of leadership that people, consciously or not, maybe not yet conscious of, but they still want it. And his popularity is not just occasional. I think there's something deeper under that.
Yeah, in fact, I wanted to go there with the question. So, one perspective on Zelensky is that in one way he was just good luck for the Ukraine, and he made this show this TV series about the school teacher becoming the president, and that made him popular, and it's just basically good luck. But maybe there's more to that. And that's my question. Do you think, does Zelensky say something about the Ukrainian society? He, as being an elected president, of who he is, and if yes, what does it say?
Yeah, that's a very important point you touched. Zelensky is a mirror of Ukrainian society. He's a very sensitive person. As a professional actor in his past life, he's a very sensitive to the demand of the audience. So his audience at the moment is all Ukrainian society. And in this sense, he is just executing the program that is demanded by the society, and he doesn't have much choice. Actually, I think for better, probably not for worse, he doesn't have much choice, because he knows that if he plays the role which is not supported by the society, he will be removed and swept away like that. Literally, there's no problem for the Ukrainian society to organize another revolution, even in the times of war. And he knows that very, very well, because he knows what is demanded by the society. So, for example, if he would theoretically, let's assume he would decide to go for some compromise with Russia, with Putin, that would not be supported by the society, that would be the end of Zelensky instantly. Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting phenomenon. That's one of the key factors which was miscalculated by the Russians, because they are used to the idea that the Tsar is always right, and Tsar can do whatever decisions he wants for the society, and the society has to swallow it. As simple as that. And even in our debates and arguments with some Russians in the beginning of all this, and even before the war, because after the war started, it became very difficult for us to really debate with Russians. But before that, this was one of the arguments. They were telling something like, "Oh, why do you think that your army will fight for Zelensky?" And we say, "Guys, you misunderstand that. Our army will never fight for Zelensky. They will fight for Ukraine. They will fight for their native land. They will fight for values, for the system of values, for their style of life, so to say. But and Zelensky will have to comply. Will have to support that. He doesn't have any other choice." And that's a very kind of very different way of organization.
I mean, you made here also the point that basically Zelensky cannot compromise because the Ukrainian as a nation never would tolerate that in this situation right now. As this war is developing with all these atrocities, and I don't know if it's a deadlock right now or where this offensive will be going, it's horrible. What do you and what do people in the Ukraine see as a possible outcome or a possible solution? I mean, one way is to think that the Ukrainians just basically can bring up the power to redefeat the Russians in Ukrainian soil, but it will be a terrible price, at least. In this kind of terrible situations between the right to defend your country, but also the urge to minimize the suffering of the country, the choices are all pretty bad. Where to go here? And where does the Ukrainian people go and why?
So the general thinking is that the idea, to put it simple, short and simple, and by the way, I saw it posted on Facebook by Michael McFaul, the very prominent American who was the ambassador of the US in Russia for many years. And he put it a poster, a picture of a poster which says, if Russia stops fighting, there will be no war. If Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no more Ukraine. And that's the fact. That's the fact, plain and simple. That's not debatable. That's not discussable. That's just the fact, because Russia and Putin's regime is denying the right of Ukraine for a sovereign to exist as a sovereign nation. And period. That's the fact. Putin has said it explicitly in many, many times, and he has acted it out implicitly, including this warfare. So, starting from this peace or no war situation, because there is a difference between peace and no war. I think most of the pacifistic kind of leaning people in the West, they are really expecting the no war status, not a peace status, because peace has to have something in the background, the fundamental reasons for peace. So peace is not exactly the only and the most kind of the most expected result for the Ukrainian society. Because the most important now is to protect the country, to protect its sovereignty, and kick the Russians out, at least from the places it is possible, of course. And of course, there will be some compromises. It's impossible to go without any compromise, but the kind of the presence of the Russians or some compromises with the constitution or with the state and the state governance system, they are not under discussion in no way. So Ukrainians are decisive and ready to fight till it's needed, because peace is, with Putin in place, is just to it would not be a peace, but a pause, probably, before the Russian army licks its wounds and prepares for another offensive, which would be the question of months or a few years. So that's important. The Ukrainians are not ready to peace at any price. Now it's after this amount of suffering, this amount of pain, so many lost lives, so many destroyed cities by the Russians, so much destroyed infrastructure. It's not under question. Now we really need to kick them out of the country, and that's the only way at the moment, because the peace talks are ongoing since the first days of war. And actually, Russia was the first that initiated the peace talks on the second day of war, when they understood that things are not going according to their plan. But still, Russia still expects to gain at least some victory. It will be, in terms of the scale, it will be funny compared to their outspoken ambitions in the beginning, but still at least to take over Mariupol, of course, the city at the Azov Sea. And and they're doing everything. They're dropping so many soldiers, actually exhausted, unprepared, conscription-based soldiers, and they will probably have the, I don't know, 10,000 more deaths, but Putin has never been concerned about number of soldiers he drops into the war. So yeah, so that's the situation. The Ukrainians are ready and willing to fight till they reach the point when they kick out the Russians from its territory and start and reach the situation when Russia will not be able to organize another offensive. Because otherwise we will not be safe. And thankfully we have enough support of the Western countries after they saw the atrocities in Bucha, in other places. There is no more doubt about what Putin's intentions are. No more naive, romantic, expectations. And now we have much support. So the Ukrainians are highly motivated, exhausted, but highly motivated, because they're fighting for their own values and freedom, their families, their soul. There is oversubscription, the enormous oversubscription for all military and these territorial defense units. There are probably 5 or 6 persons, 6 men per 1 gun. So there are many more men willing to go to fight than there are weapons. So that's the situation, and it will probably take more time. And it's we treat it as a necessary cost to clean up the country.
I mean, one perspective that you hear often in Western Europe is that you have to give Putin some little victory in order to find a compromise. And is this a perspective that, from an Ukrainian perspective, is just not tolerable, or is it when you look at the picture, also the relationship between the West and Russia and the Ukraine in between? What you're describing is peace is not possible in the foreseeable future. What we will have is maybe a pause, maybe that the Russian will lick the wounds for a while, but that's basically what we get, which basically means war will stay in the middle of Europe, and we will have to live with it. And any perspective that would say we have to pacify Putin in some way sounds from that a little frivolous. Is that basically how it looks from an Ukrainian perspective?
I have a question. Do you imagine someone in the US or the UK or France or whatever Western country, for example, in 1944, saying, let's maybe give Hitler some victory so that he gets pacified and maybe he will stop fighting. Then maybe let's leave him Poland or Czech or whatever. Let's allow him to go hold it. I don't know, in 1943 or something. I think that the situation is pretty much the same. This is a maniac psychopath who is holding hostage of his own country and another country now, and he's ready to go further. I deeply believe that my native Lithuania is under threat, and Latvia and Estonia and even Poland. That's not theoretical anymore. So with that psychopath in power, with resources, he promises nothing good. So the peace, it would not be a good price to pay for peace. No way.
No, I completely understand. Using the example with Hitler, 43, of course, there are 2 big differences. One is that Hitler 43 did not have a nuclear arsenal behind, and there was no China in the background, and a huge world situation that's unfolding where even Russia is just a part of a bigger confrontation going on, a systems confrontation. And it sounds cynical because it's basically taking away all what's really happening in the suffering of the Ukrainian people. All of a sudden looks like something that's not in the center of what's happening. But there's a world confrontation going on. That's not a world confrontation so much between the West and Russia, but between West and China, and Russia being a part of this, an important part. So the situation in that sense is very different to a situation 43 in Europe and Hitler losing the war.
Look, of course, this is different because Putin holds the nuclear arsenal, but that's not the universal argument. On the one hand, I really don't think there's a huge threat that Putin would start using his nuclear power. He's threatening. That's his style, and everyone needs to understand that he's behaving like a hooligan in the street. He has been always threatening, and the European and the Western leaders were always, holding back. And on the other hand, the question is, if that psychopath has a nuclear power, does that necessarily mean that he's allowed to take whatever territories he wants, to kill any number of thousands or millions of people he wants, to rape any number of women or even girls, to destroy any number of cities, and to terrorize the whole world? So where is the limit? Where is the limit? Is anything justified by the fact that he holds the nuclear power? I think the Western leader have to call his bluff, because he's just bluffing with the nuclear powers. He understands that the moment he presses that red button, he is over. He is over as a political leader, and probably, of course, there is some chance that the whole life on Earth could be destroyed. But he would be over even if he uses the very small scale tactical nuclear bomb. That he knows very well. And in addition to that, there is the system of pressing that red button is not that easy. I think there are 6 or 7 persons involved, and knowing the level of trust or absence of trust actually in the political elite in Russia, how many generals are already imprisoned, including the chief of FSB, who was responsible for the Ukrainian part, and many other military generals are already in prisons. So there is such a distrust that Putin would never give an order which he is not sure would be executed, and that would be another scenario for his end as a political leader. Of course, he's afraid of the coup, and rightly so. Thankfully, hopefully that someone will take care of that. And speaking of China, very shortly, I think we are overestimating Putin's sympathy towards China, or maybe even China's sympathy towards Putin. We're deeply overestimating that. I think China is, to put it very mildly, not happy with what is happening in Europe, and China is, despite of all the confrontation, the political confrontation, and the Taiwan issue and others, of course, is very dependent on the Western part of the world. Its economy is so integrated, and China would be the mostly dissatisfied having this psychopath next door who is releasing these nuclear bombs. I think we are, and the recent behavior by the Chinese leadership is proving that they are not supporting Putin that much. Even I would say they're giving some pushback.
And there's, no, I understand. And there's also the other side. Or what society, what future are we creating in Europe, in the world, if we are deciding to live with these atrocities?
Exactly. So that's the question. And from all that, the only way to stop Putin is on the battlefield in Ukraine. And in Ukraine, the Ukrainians are doing this service for the whole Western democratic liberal world. And with the support, of course, we are not that wealthy in terms of the state capacity, but now recently we've been receiving lots of financial support and military support, and with every day Ukrainians are doing better and better, and with their level of motivation on the battlefield, I'm pretty optimistic actually. I think we will have some developments. And the two symbolic dates are approaching. One symbolic date is Orthodox Easter, which is this Sunday, the 24th of April. So, and you know that Putin is very much using the Russian Orthodox Church and this patriarch Kirill, who is actually the incarnation of evil. He's using this traditional Orthodox rhetorics in his propaganda. So of course they want at least some marginal victory by the Easter. And another even more significant day, as you know, is the 9th of May, which is the Victory Day. And Putin has been building all his mythic and narrative structure of the mighty and powerful Russia as a successor of this, the victor of the World War II. And during the last 10, 15 years, that was so overexploited that it seems like madness. All those wealthy Russians in Moscow driving their BMWs and Mercedes and Porsche with the signs "Na Berlin," which means to Berlin, and some of them with the signs "Можем повторить," which means we can repeat it. And this is actually a madness, a very dangerous madness, and they've been playing it for like 10, 15 years recently. And of course, for that Victory Day, for the 9th of May, Putin is just he just needs to bring at least some victory. So he is very desperate, and it seems that he will be disappointed. And not to mention the recent, sinking of the Moskva flagship of the Black Sea. I think this is I've heard that I didn't check the facts, but I've heard that the last time that Russia has lost its flagship of the fleet was the 1905 Tsushima battle near Japan.
Oh, really?
In the Far East. Yeah, and of course there were several large ships lost in the World War II, but this kind of flagship or this level of symbolism, So it's a huge event. It's a highly intimidating and even humiliating event. So of course Putin is desperate and he is getting crazy. I think he's also working on another scenario to show that there was a big systemic betrayal in the Russian elite, because he cannot come with the defeat. He still needs to bring some victories. So if he is not able to bring a military victory, so he would at least bring a kind of victory of solving this coup d'etat, the inner betrayal by arresting some 20 or 30 top-level generals and special forces and intelligence officers and so on. So showing to his society that, look, I know the reason why we failed in Ukraine. These were the traitors, you know. So, and I think that many experts are saying that he's preparing that line, that scenario as well. We'll see. We'll see. We can see lots of very, very interesting developments in the upcoming days.
So also as a final question, what do you think we realistically can hope for?
Yeah. So my feeling from all the sources of information I have is that we will have very, very intensive battles in the upcoming 2 weeks. Maybe 2-3 weeks will be hot, and there will be no significant developments in the peace talks line, because Russia will be desperately trying to get at least some marginal victory. So I think by the around 5th of May, and then if they don't gain anything, I think they will not retreat. Then the whole warfare will go into this positional fight. When Russians will hold some territories, the Ukrainians will be pushing and more going from defense into offense. And then that phase can take up to several months if Russia is not going for really constructive position in the peace talks. And the Ukrainians are willing to agree, but not to any price. Not to everything we've been hearing from Russia recently was not realistic.
Vytas, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Thomas. It was a pleasure talking to you.